Prije točno 30 godina Europska unija dobila je ime i obrise kakve danas znamo. Dogovorom sklopljenim u nizozemskom gradu na obali rijeke Meuse. Sporazum iz Maastrichta temelj je zajedničke valute, ali u njemu je i sjeme zajedničke vanjske i sigurnosne politike. Iznjedren nakon pada Berlinskog zida, raspada Sovjetskog saveza, tijekom rata u bivšoj Jugoslaviji nakon Zaljevskog rata. Veliki povijesni trenutak u kojem su otvorena brojna pitanja o budućnosti zajednice europskih država u svijetu koji se mijenja. Predsjednik Europske komisije Jacques Delors tih je godina izjavio: povijest se ubrzava, moramo i mi. Od pojave pandemije povijest se još jednom ubrzala. Grad na obali rijeke Meuse sada je ugostio europske građane u sklopu konferencije o budućnosti Europe. U okviru desetljeća, nakon dviju velikih kriza, financijske i izbjegličke, a u svjetlu treće zdravstveno-sigurnosne, opet se pitamo koja je to uloga Europe i kakva je njezina budućnost u svijetu koji se mijenja.
This union cannot survive, it is not reformed in a radical way. You cannot govern a continent big as this with in competition with China, America, Russia, in the way we are doing it. This conference is not okay. Well, maybe it's time once to reflect on the future of the European Union. We organize it because everybody feels that it's necessary to change the direction of the European Union, to make it a union was more sustainable, more effective, faster in the decision making, and with more means and deeds.
A hoće li Europa i ovaj put premostiti izazove i novim akcijama doći do nove svrhe? Koje su to naše unutarnje i vanjske granice s kojima se moramo suočiti i koje moramo razumjeti za budućnost i prema budućnosti?
Von allen ist jetzt mutiges und verantwortungsbewusstes Handeln gefragt. Das will ich doch sagen. Für meine Generation ist Krieg in Europa undenkbar geworden und wir müssen dafür sorgen, dass das so bleibt. Es ist unsere verdammte Pflicht und Aufgabe als Staats- und Regierungschefs zu verhindern, dass es in Europa zu einer kriegerischen Eskalation kommt.
Et le moment que nous vivons, marqué par cette situation géopolitique exceptionnelle et les menaces à la fois liées à des conflits voisins et aux risques terroristes, nous impose de prendre des mesures plus radicales, de reprendre en main le contrôle de nos frontières et, ce faisant, la maîtrise de notre destin. Voilà pourquoi nous avons décidé, à la lumière aussi de beaucoup d'échanges que j'ai eus avec mes homologues, de faire de la question de la maîtrise des frontières et de la réforme de l'espace Schengen une priorité de cette présidence, s'appuyant en cela, comme je l'évoquais, sur aussi les textes récemment proposés par la Commission, avec un objectif simple, qui est de protéger l'identité européenne et les Européens des fracas des temps, c'est-à-dire notre esprit de liberté, nos différences, notre volonté de circuler librement, en tenant mieux nos frontières extérieures et en ayant une politique collectivement plus efficace.
El kell kerülni a háborút. Ezt nem csak a humánum, hanem a magyar érdek is mondatja velünk. Gondoljanak bele, háború esetén 100 000 szám, akár milliós nagyságrendben érkeznének menekültek Ukrajnából, és ez alapjaiban rajzolná át Magyarország politikai és gazdasági helyzetét. Brüsszel felől sem lehetünk nyugodtak. Ott gyülekeznek Soros György ügynökei, a 30 ezüstért mindenre kapható júdások, a nemzetállamokat ellenségnek, de legalábbis meghaladandó maradványnak tekintő írástudók, szakértők és tanácsadók siserehada, és persze a mindenben, így a migrációban is pénzt szimatoló globális tőke farkasai.
Njemačka je tek nedavno dobila vladu. Izborni izazov čeka prvo Emanuela Macrona, onda i Viktora Orbana. Izazovi su preveliki da bi i dalje ovisili o političkim ciklusima u zemljama članicama. Izazov pred Europom jest u obrani temeljnih vrijednosti. No kako? Horizont je uzdrman, utjecaj preveliki, usprkos novom mehanizmu oporavka i otpornosti koji daje naznake zametka moguće buduće čvršće integracije. Vanjska i sigurnosna politika tu je jedna od ključnih pologa.
Ground theme of Maastricht gathering was Europe in the world. In terms of challenges that we face from the inside, we can talk about, different conversation going on within the EU, question of rule of law. You've mentioned new instrument that can maybe be a seed for something in the future. I don't know if it's a treaty change or not. You can say it better than I am. That's one part of the issues. And the other is this external dimension, which we see now, from Ukraine. We have EU-Africa summit this week also. So it's a question of geopolitics, of disinformation, of hybrid threats that are, entering democracy in the ways not envisaged before. We see our south, our east, our north neighborhood with Arctic being challenged in various ways, and the digital sphere and energy in terms of our transition to climate neutral continent. So it's a huge burden of subjects out there. How can we, keep our heads clear and understand this context, not creating some kind of atrophy in our societies, with citizens being I don't know if I'm too bold to say driven insane with all of this going on.
Well, I think you're quite right that this is an overwhelming number of issues of a very complex and sometimes indeed somewhat alarming nature. Without wanting to go into too much detail about external action, the current situation does not entirely seem promising. In the Ukraine crisis, I'm sure you've talked about with others, is not putting the EU as such in a very prominent or relevant light. And that is, I think, worrying to many people who see the need to think of the EU as an international actor with some credibility. And what's happened in recent times is not entirely in that direction.
Sad thing is that when it comes to foreign policy, the EU basically only is reacting to crisis and to major crises. And this is quite dramatic. For example, when we look at Ukraine, it's for the first time since the end of World War II that we see a real possibility of one European country directly militarily aggressing, invading another sovereign country, and the EU is absent here.
Well, it's not the first. We had Yugoslav crisis.
Exactly, and this is where it reminds me personally. I zoom back into December 1991. And I was a young student then, and I remember that I was shocked when I saw live on TV the destruction of the old town of Dubrovnik by Yugoslav artillery. And I was even more shocked when I realized that then already Europe was silent. Nothing came from the EU because the member states were not able to speak with one voice. But then something very interesting happened afterwards. I remember this shellings of Dubrovnik that was on St. Nicholas Day, on 6th of December, 1991. 3 days later, on the 9th of December, here in Maastricht, the heads of state and of government met, and they agreed on adopting a common foreign and security policy. And this was certainly no coincidence. And then we fast forward 7.5 years later, the same scenario. In June 1999, the war in Kosovo has ended after a 78 bombing campaign by NATO. And in the same week, the EU agreed on setting up a common security and defense policy, allowing the EU to deploy peacekeeping troops abroad. So you see, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to defense, it almost systematically it needs a major crisis for the EU to take action. And I think maybe here also the Ukraine will work as a catalyst that the member states will finally, if something happens, agree to take the next step and, for example, get rid of this unanimity requirement in some parts. But I'm afraid it first needs a crisis for this to happen.
Pandemija je mnogima zamutila oči, pa se od nosa teško dalje vidi. Krize koje traju u južnom susjedstvu Europe ne prestaju. Posljednja, francusko povlačenje iz Malija, koje je u jednoj od najnestabilnijih, a geostrateški najvažnijih država i prostora svijeta, otvorilo je prostor za ulazak drugih igrača.
Avec l'arrivée de la Russie, ça ne va pas être comme la France. La France, il sait son propre intérêt. Mais la Russie, il te montre carrément... Bon, la France, il sait son propre... Mais en même temps, des jeux de manipulation. Cette histoire de terrorisme qu'on parle là, c'est à cause de l'histoire de Kadhafi qu'on a eu ça au Mali. Et l'histoire de Kadhafi, vous avez compris. Kadhafi, vous voulez quoi? Créer la propre monnaie de l'Afrique, lancer des satellites, tout ça. Mais M. Sarkozy, il n'a pas laissé terminer en complicité avec les Américains. Ils l'ont éliminé. Une fois fini avec la Libye, il y a quoi? Il y a le pétrole, il y a le gaz là, lors du Mali. Ils ont envoyé les troupes là-bas au Mali pour créer cette histoire de djihadistes, terroristes, islamistes, qui sont les Américains et les Français. Et la Russie, c'est pas comme ça. Il vient t'aider, mais il te dit carrément 50-50.
3, 2, 1 and smile.
Europa s velikom ukrajinskom krizom na istoku požuruje ugostiti pan-europsko-afrički summit s novim paketom pomoći od 150 milijarda eura. S razlogom.
With this new package, we want to catalyze investments in 3 categories. The first, of course, is infrastructure. And there, the top priority is energy. Energy, the pathway to renewable energy, and of course, the transition towards renewable energy.
L'Afrique qui a suffisamment porté le poids de l'histoire entend enfin se libérer de son fardeau pour être acceptée et respectée comme partie prenante de nouvelles dynamiques qui régissent la gouvernance mondiale et forgent le destin commun de l'humanité.
Talking about our borders and our foreign and security policy, the issue of migration is the huge issue of our time, of our presence, and of our future. Of course, we have this week EU-African Union summit. We also have unresolved crises in the Middle East still, and open question of Afghanistan after the withdrawal of Western forces. How can we tackle millennial issue and historical issue as migration is?
The migration is a very difficult question for the EU because it showed us that our values and our interests do not always coincide. It was a sort of a mantra for the EU to say, okay, our values and our interests go hand in hand. And if we promote democracy, the rule of law, human rights across the world, then basically we make the world a better place. And then in 2015, when the migration crisis exploded, we saw that no, it is not always the same. Sometimes we have to put our interests before our values. And I think this is also a reason why the EU has adopted its foreign policy strategy with a global strategy, that we have become more realistic. We now say, look at the world as it is and not as we would like it to see. And this reflects in all kinds of policy. This not only in foreign and defense policy, also in trade policy. and in others. So we are not longer the idealistic guy holding up global rules, trying to promote global rules, but we climbed down from the mountain and we have become a player on the global field where we defend our interests against our systemic rivals.
When it comes to Africa and our other challenges more to the south and in the Mediterranean, again, we have much work to do. The Maastricht conference, the panel there was on EU in the world and on migration, which of course on a day-to-day basis is at least as much on people's agendas, especially in some member states, as what may be happening elsewhere. So the EU is trying, I think, to process, given the possibilities and pressures of the moment, and it doesn't always find it easy to do this quickly and clearly to people. All the more reason to try and promote structures in which citizens do feel that there's some kind of reliability, there's trustworthiness, that there is an entity there, the EU, which is doing its best as a complex entity, which is hampered in foreign policy by the unanimity requirement. And perhaps in anecdotal, I could say that in one of the groups I was observing, this was one of the main points. The recommendations from the conference was that in most points, unanimity should be replaced by qualified majority voting, except enlargements. But for all, I fear that's not going to happen in reality, but I think it does reflect a feeling of frustration that we can talk a lot, but when it comes to the difficult decisions and then doing something, we're falling a bit behind. I do think also at the moment there's a strong pressures building up within the union to try and overcome this. And this year, I think we're going to see some new initiatives pushing in the direction of a more coherent and effective external action. However, we have to wait and see how that plays out.
And for the end, concerning our internal action, we saw also this week this ruling of European Court of Justice concerning the rule of law. It was a huge debate in the construction of this new mechanism of recovery and resilience, and it is our fundamental as a union. Rule of law is something that is core of Europe and also core of our values. So how can we get out of this situation where some feel more equal or unequal, or some feel more entitled or not entitled to follow?
Well, equally difficult and painful. And I think that we are indeed touching at the moment on some of the very fundamental issues. Rule of law is one, and I personally, and I think I, like many, feel that we have now to follow through with an effective commitment to deal with clearly defined breaches or threats, possible breaches. The second point that goes with it is the question of solidarity, not just respecting the same values, but I think equally in people's minds is the issue of solidarity. It's not just the funds are equally available and you should do certain things to qualify, but these funds are a manifestation of solidarity, and solidarity needs to be expressed also vis-a-vis, to take a topical example, acceptance of migrants. If we're going to share our resources, we need to share our burdens fairly, and we need to share our risks. And I link it back again to the Recovery Resilience Facility, the idea that we are now sharing risks as well as burdens is essential to have a feeling of meaningful solidarity. This is going to be difficult because it's a very hard line to draw between diversity and unacceptable difference. And that, I think, is a deeper challenge that we're going to have to go on working on, because where is divergence from common standards acceptable, and where does the red line come by which we say that's a no-go?
A gdje podvlačimo crtu? Gdje su naše granice? Gdje je naša granica? U svijetu, poput ovog oko nas, nekada se čini da ih nema. Život uz granicu uvijek je bio opasan i tvrd. Na granici se testirala naša ljudskost. Na granici smo testirali čovječanstvo.
Конечно, конечно. Куда ж? Старость пришла. Всю жизнь проколотилась. Это самое, на старости хоть бы уже пожить нормально. Так не дают. И кто с кем воюет, вы мне скажите. Украина с Украиной.
Большой не будет, но что-то будет. Какая-то будет. Большая не то время и не то сейчас вооружение, чтобы затеялась большая война.
Я тебе чекала, чи коня нема, чи стежки не знав, мати не пускала, чи коня нема, чи стежки не знав, мати не пускала. Коня я мав, і стежку я знав, і мати пускала. Найменша сестра, бодай не зросла, сідельце сховала. Найменша сестра, бодай не зросла,